Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Catherine. And Happy New Year, everybody. What a perfect book to have at this point in time, especially if you're in the States, even if you're not in the States, with the pandemic and everything else going on. I really think that this kind of came at the perfect opportunity. I started reading it, it was our December pick, and it was just the perfect book for the holidays, for dealing with a pandemic, for dealing with a coup with our government and everything else. So it certainly really struck me, and it resonated with me. And I would just first love to first say thank you for being here. And secondly, I would love to hear all about your book and what inspired you. And I would love to hear a little bit about your story before we sort of dig in.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am very, very conscious that I don't really want to have written a book that's perfect for when you've just had a coup, frankly. I'd really, really rather
It was more
rather
the perfect
anybody-
antidote.
I'd really rather you guys didn't have to deal with that in the first place. Yeah, so Wintering, my book, I'll wave it at you. It's a, it's a book about, it's partly a memoir, but it's also about the fallow periods in our life and how nature can show us how to get through the darkest times, the coldest times, the most difficult times. And that if we turn our attention to how we live through those times, we can find a way through that helps us to heal and that helps us to come out with more wisdom, not necessarily having won, not necessarily in a better position than where we started or any massive promises like that, but with a sense that we are able to deal with life in the next phase and that we can also offer loads to other people. You want to know my story behind it? Well, I didn't intend to quite write the book that I wrote. I'd meant it to be, this lovely distant overview of what it's like to winter, just to give advice to other people from a really sunny spot in my own life. But as soon as I sat down to write it, loads of stuff happened to me. So first of all, my husband became ill. Then I realized that I had a long-term chronic illness. I was already leaving my lovely, cozy full-time job at that point, but becoming ill made me leave it even quicker. And everything just suddenly felt very chaotic, very frightening, very risky, I suppose, very exposing. And then at the end of that long process, my son had to be pulled out of school because he stopped coping. So we had this year in which everything became very unstable all of a sudden, and we felt very cast out from everyday life. And as I wrote Wintering, I began to weave in my own experiences. And I think that's probably what makes the book so relatable, because actually you're walking alongside me as I winter.
I talk a lot about deep diving into nature, and
Right.
I love that you use all these metaphors to describe what wintering is and how to get through it, and paying attention to nature. And I think it's such a beautiful way to observe things, because I feel like we are so removed from nature and the natural cycle of things, and we don't realize the natural cycle within our own selves anymore.
Absolutely. And I think that's really hit us this year. I mean, one of the things about a pandemic is that it bangs our nose up against nature like red in tooth and claw, the kind of terrifying parts of nature, not the bits that we want to see through the window of the cafe at the
Yeah.
at the sort of edge of the national park, not the beautiful bits, but
Right.
actually the way that nature is so often about raw basic survival and about questions of life and death.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking, what a year for you to turn 40 in as I talk, because I feel like that's another moment in your life when you begin to become really conscious of those big questions. It points us in that direction. I don't know if it did for you, but
100% has, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think maybe that's why it's more resonating too, but I feel like at this point in my life, at least, in I don't know how old you guys are who are watching, but there's this moment and the shift where you're sort of looking back and figuring out how to move forward and how to
Mm,
do that. And you go from that, like what you're saying, from being like youthful and ripe it feels like dark and old or something, and you realize like neither one is bad and neither one is necessarily true, but they kind of
Mm,
go hand in hand, and there's this tending to that needs to be done, and this nurturing and moving forward in the next part in this next chapter, and how to nurture that next chapter. And it definitely at least threw me for a dark moment of woe is me and what the heck do I do and how do I move
yeah.
forward, and your book sort of was a great trail map for that moment and how to move forward, and letting yourself know that it's okay, because
Mm,
I feel like we're not really allowed to take a step back often, and your journey of taking a step back is very
mm.
proactive and it's very brave.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was just writing an article about this, especially for writers, and I was challenging the idea that of writer's block, because we've all heard of writer's block, the idea that
Sure.
writers, suddenly get to this point when they just can't create. And I was saying, well, actually, if you reimagine your writer's block as a wintering, then it goes from being a passive process to being an active process. Because for me, wintering is something that you can engage with. You can like live through very positively and very mindfully that process of change that's happening. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes painless. We're so used to things
Mm.
promising us that that's going to take all the effort and all the pain away and you can hack it. I don't
Yeah.
think you can hack turning 40 in the same way that you can't hack a pandemic.
Right.
um, but what you can do is stop flinching away from it, because so much pain lies in that process of trying to ignore it or pretend it's not happening or deny it, or that every time the thought comes into your mind, you push it away really fast and try and distract yourself with maybe something that doesn't do you much good.
Right.
I think that if we can actually engage with that process of wintering and ask what it's telling us, then we can survive it a lot better, we can endure it better, and we have a chance of coming out the other side.
To turn more towards nature when you're going through these experiences? Is that something that seems to help you, or
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I learnt this when I was writing my last book, which was called The Electricity of Every Living Thing. And it followed the year that I walked the Southwest Coast Path in Devon, which is this incredible, wild kind of path that people really dream all their life of walking.
wow.
It clings to the Devon coast. It goes up and down cliffs. It's really rugged. It's really exposed. And I walked it because I'd hit a crisis point in my life where I just didn't know where to turn. And through that process, I came to having an autism diagnosis, because I realized the process of walking helped me put a load of things together. So one of the things I think that contact with nature does is it just opens up a space for us to think. We are so bombarded with so much noise, like visual noise as well, that constant winking of the phone. I mean, even, like even here in my study, I keep looking over my shoulder on this Zoom and looking at the mess that my bookshelves are and thinking,
It's
I've
perfect.
really
No, it's perfect. It's real life. I mean, look at
oh,
mine is like I've dumped mine
yours
and
is
they're all hiding.
beautiful.
No, I just quickly like put them up. They're all hiding underneath my bench that I'm sitting on. So no, see, they're just falling off right now.
Well, I mean, it's really funny, isn't it? Because in our own homes, we can be so hypercritical, I think. And I see the dirt all the time that I've,
But the dirt is so good. It's so good to have dirt in your home. I feel like there's so
yeah,
much perfectionism out there, and that's the
yeah,
problem. And that's a
yeah,
big part of the problem is that people are putting these ideas, and I know that I'm probably guilty of it as well, of you want to put on your best face.
of
And
course.
you don't want to write home with bad news, so then
Mm,
you ignore, you don't want people to see.
yeah, that's
And but it's
the
life, and life
gesture.
is dirty, and it's
Yeah.
it builds up. And
Well, and actually, I mean, that's one of the things that nature shows us when we go outside. Nature is chaotic, but we read that chaos as beautiful and we read it as inspiring. And I think we can take some of that back. But I do think that that it's not just about like escaping the house. It's about opening up a forum that is symbolic as well. You know, nature lets us project ideas onto it. It lets us read mythological ideas, you know, it lets us create metaphors from the way plants and animals behave, which I riff on a lot in the book.
Yeah.
And that helps us to think, like, all it takes us out of our kind of literal everyday life and lets us roam on a different level. I mean, I know you're a great outdoor lover.
I mean, I mean, that's why I loved this, because I loved finding all the metaphors, especially with the ant and the grasshopper and the
Mm,
bees, and
yeah.
how they all operate so differently, and we make sense of it, and
Mm,
somehow, project, and what you're saying, like put projections on them and somehow make it so much more meaningful. And
yeah.
I adore all of that. I love it. How have you found wintering? What have you been doing?
It's a really live issue in the UK at the moment because we're in a new nationwide lockdown.
Yeah.
And at the moment, everyone is fighting over how much we can go out of the house. There's like a really live debate about whether people should be arrested if they drive 5 miles down the
Oh my
road to
goodness.
go for a walk. That it's become a really hot debate. And I think okay, this is maybe a strange angle to take on it, but I think it's really healthy for us to have that conversation and to be put into the position of asserting our need to go outside, because that's definitely how I've coped with lockdown. You know, I've just walked as much
Yeah.
as I can. I've taken my son out as much as I can. I've swam in the sea as much as I can. You know, I've done everything I can to get out of the house and just to watch the changing of the seasons, because pandemic has made, I mean, you know, if we're not engaging with the terrifying aspect of it, the sort of flip side of it is it's incredibly boring and flat and stale. And it's such a privilege to have a boring pandemic, right? I mean, I'm very lucky that everyone in my family is still alive and well, but life has felt incredibly samey all the way through the year.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that you can combat that, I think, is by watching the changes that happen in nature. You know, there's this constant cycle of the seasons, of weather systems, of the phases of the moon, of the way the stars are moving across the sky, the different shifts of flowers that are coming in. I
Yeah.
learned a few weeks ago that the Japanese identify 52 micro seasons across the year. And each one reflects a different natural change. So like one week will be the week that the cherry blossom comes out, for example. So it'll be a different wildflower that blooms, or, you know, something dying off or dropping its leaves.
I love that.
I think if we can watch those changes, there's always that little next phase for us to engage with, to watch, to feel awe and wonder at. You know, we don't, like, nature doesn't have to be big and vast for us to feel that sense of wonder at it. It can be tiny, you know, it can be the weeds that grow in the cracks
Mhm.
between your pavement out the front of your house. Like that can be beautiful too.
It's so beautiful, and I love that no matter what, nature will provide and will prevail. But you can have all these you can have concrete, and if you don't tend to your concrete, the weeds will crack the concrete and
Yeah.
eventually take
Yeah.
over. And I love that.
Yeah.
That it will
Yeah.
always, that nature will always prevail. And so I feel like you're right, like going outside and observing and being part of nature and watching the
Mm,
seasons. We need to really cultivate, and we need to nurture that within ourselves. And
mm, mm.
I mean, I say that like I'm sure it's controversial or whatever, but we really do need to get outside and get outdoors.
No, I feel that very strongly too. I feel like my ability to survive this time and, like, you know, to come out with it, my mental health intact, to come out with it as healthy as I can be and able to fight this dreadful virus, I
Mhm.
need contact with the outdoors, you know. And I mean, I have a small back garden. So in many ways, like, I'm safe. Like, my son has a trampoline there. If nothing else, I can bounce on his trampoline. But for all the people who don't have, you know, their own outdoor space, I think banning people from leaving the house at all, for me, is a step too far. There's some really interesting research about how walking regularly prevents dementia too. And one of the reasons that they think that this happens is not just about the physical movement. It's because when you walk through nature, you learn to name things, and you're constantly rehearsing little tiny fragments of knowledge in your mind. Every time you walk, you stop saying, oh, that's a white flower. You say, oh, that's a, I'm trying to think of a white flower.
I know, like a daisy or
that's a daisy. Yeah, like my yellow flower is a dandelion or whatever. And that actually really helps to keep your mind sharp. And that's so tiny, isn't it? Isn't that like the tiniest, most wonderful thing?
What have you heard from your readers who have had to winter? What have you heard about how they've had to sit with their feelings and their anxieties?
Mm. Oh goodness, I've just had such a deluge of amazing letters and notes from people who are wintering. I think, what are they telling me? I guess they've really appreciated just being given permission to be going through the phase they're going through. Like, people who are bereaved, for example, people who are, at the beginning of a long-term illness or kind of well into it. People who've had a big relationship breakup, like loads of different categories of wintering are coming into my inbox. And like nearly every single one says, I feel like you're describing my experience and I feel like I'm allowed to have it. And I mean, obviously, like I'm delighted to help, but also I think that tells us such a lot about how we push those people to the sidelines and how those people they don't have to feel isolated, like isolation doesn't have to be intrinsic to grieving.
What really resonated with me is that you don't even need something to experience that kind of
Mm,
wintering,
mm,
or it doesn't have to be pain per se, but that
mm,
sort of darkness or sad feeling. And I know that I go through that often, and it's
yeah.
probably monthly cyclical feelings of feeling
Mm,
down, and not just sadness, but just like I don't want to be around people, or I want to clean my bookshelf, or I want to just hide in my home. And
mm.
um, I loved that you gave permission to do that, and you showed it through
Yeah.
example, which was really wonderful and helpful.
I find real beauty in those moments, actually. I kind of, that idea of melancholy instead of sadness.
Mhm.
Melancholy is this emotion that's got a kind of a beautiful sadness about it. And I actually love diving into those days. As look, like when it stretches into weeks and months, and that's a very different question.
Mhm.
But sometimes, like experiencing a pure hit of that emotion, and all the things that are clustered with it, like longing and grief and regret,
Yeah.
nostalgia, like that whole kind of cluster of feelings. I think it can be very beautiful. I think it has a quality all of its own. I think it's a place where creativity can truly reside. And yeah, I actually, it's another thing that I find that I have had taken away from me this year are those very quiet days where everything falls slack for a while. And yeah, you can do things like pottering about, rearranging your bookshelves. And I mean, I love getting everything out of the kitchen cupboards and rearranging it. I mean, that's like my happy time.
It's so fun. It's just like a total tornado, and like, oh my god, a shit show. And then like it's so cathartic to be able to
I mean,
go through that.
I'm a kind of very kind of polar opposites approach to house management. Like I hate cleaning, but if I'm going to clean, I'm going to go around everything with a toothpick, I'm
Yes.
sort of,
So you only
I'm
have to do
either,
it once.
yeah, like, and it's got to be immaculate by the time I'm going to detail my house if I can.
Yeah.
But like all of those moments when you're just living inside your head for a few hours and following a train of thought in silence and in peace, it's really necessary. I think it's so rejuvenating, and
Mhm.
I think we've been denied a lot of that in these last months. Actually, I think we're ready to
Yes,
flow into that
100%.
space.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're absolutely. Or I find that someone else doesn't understand it, and it is
Yeah.
downplayed with positivity of, oh, you can do it, you're fine, and don't
Yeah.
think like that, or and it has nothing to do with thinking badly or I'm just down. It's just this natural wave of, I mean, again, I look to nature like this downtime of I
Mm.
need this for myself so that I can sort of fix, or not fix, that's a terrible word, so I can nurture myself
Yeah,
and
yeah.
be kind to myself during this phase so that I
Mm,
can be
mm.
better in the next phase, or not better, but just I can move to the next phase, I suppose.
You can just be in it. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've had an interesting few months because my husband has lost his job recently,
I'm
and
sorry.
it's been no, well, you know, actually, I think ultimately it's kind of quite positive. But obviously, you know, initially it felt terrifying for him,
Mhm.
and it's been very interesting watching him go through, you know, the whole cycle of a wintering, and watching him sink into it actually, and come to accept it, and to actually to be sad about it, and to be afraid, and to be uncertain. And once he reached that point, he was happier. Like, even though he was sad and uncertain and afraid, he
Mhm.
was also strangely content with being there. And there was a kind of beauty in that moment for him, I think. And he actually said, "Oh, I kind of really understand your book at the moment." Because normally his you know reaction to my stuff is like, "Yeah, there's no laser guns though, is there? You know,
Sounds like my husband.
are there any aliens? Not that interested."
That's awesome.
But, you know, it's interesting watching someone close to you go, because I've spent the last few months talking about this book, you know, well, the
Sure.
last year, because it came out in the UK earlier. And then suddenly watching someone very close to me go through that has really reaffirmed my belief in what a healing space it can be, and how many moments of beauty there are in that, and what it's done for him, and how it's actually refreshed him as a person, and just nudged him back onto a different path again, and filled him with, like, you know, new ideas and compassion and
Yeah,
all sorts of wonderful qualities. It's actually, yeah, it's been an interesting time.
that's pretty amazing. I think that if you fight it, it could be more detrimental. It's better to just, as you say, like, just
Yeah,
face it head on and move through it and acknowledge it.
yeah,
Um, I find that at least by even just talking about it, maybe you're not talking to anybody, but just saying it
yeah.
and acknowledging it, it's really helpful.
Yeah, and like the flip of that is holding space for other people's moments of sadness without doing all that. Oh, you'll be all right.
Right.
Don't worry about it. You know.
Right,
Ju-
exactly. What was the most difficult part of wintering for you?
Mm. Do you know what? I think I know that quite clearly. It's the paranoia that kind of often comes in wintering. You know, that because you're isolated, those moments of wondering what other people are thinking of you, and assuming that everybody's gossiping about you, or that everyone thinks that you're a terrible failure, or that, you know, you're never ever going to be able to work again, that you've shamed yourself. You know,
Mhm.
I think that's a set of feelings that we don't talk about very much. They're quite embarrassing feelings to have, but I think they're there for everyone, you know, and we've all watched friends go through that moment on social media sometimes, you know, and you know, I think we need to learn to recognize that as a very normal part of the process. But for me, that's the horrible one, like that
Mm.
sense of, or that fear of ostracism, or, you know, that you've done something permanent that you can't recover from. I hate that bit.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Um, I thought about it for a long time, but actually, the writing of it was, I mean, probably about 6 months. But actually, the bulk of it got written very quickly at the end of that, because so much had happened, like so much life had taken over while I was planning to write it, that I got quite close to my deadline and thought, I'm not going to make it. So actually, it was probably 2 or 3 months, the vast majority of it got written in,
That's incredible.
which,
It's like
yeah,
nature handed you something. And
yeah.
why did you decide to name your book Wintering?
Um, the name came before the book, actually, like the name popped into my head when I was talking to someone about a wintering phase they were going through one night. And I found myself saying, oh, well, you're wintering. And then I had to write a book to explain what I meant almost. So it was kind of quite a backwards process, I think.
I am wondering how one can overcome the feeling of guilt needing to do nothing and allow yourself to winter. I find myself feeling guilty of needing a break a lot of the time. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, that's not a feeling that's easily overcome. And actually, I think it's almost like you commit to wintering as a practice and kind of lean into it. And eventually, I think you understand the need that you have for it. But the guilt is almost part of it, actually. It's part of the fight you put up. It's part of the battle. And I really would just say to watch those feelings of guilt, like observe them and see what they're telling you about yourself, about how you feel you have to act in the world, like what responsibilities you have, what responsibilities you want to have, and what conventions are put on us as well. You know, we do have that like very heavy obligation to always seem busy now and to create busyness out of nowhere if we don't feel like we look important enough or occupied enough or clever enough or whatever. So I don't think you can avoid the guilt, but I think you can learn to talk to it, like have a conversation with it almost, and to ask what it shows you. Like I still get a bit of guilt, but probably less than I used to, because I've realized how much I need those times of rest and retreat, definitely.
Thank you so much. I feel like I could listen to you. I'm so in awe because again, your book has really spoken to me this last year, and I feel like it gave me a lot of permission, and I can imagine it gave a lot of people a lot of permission, and it's very wonderful to read a book that talks about wintering and yet it's uplifting and
sometimes.
But that's the thing, and it really is. It's it gives permission, and I felt like a weight had been lifted, and so I feel really grateful to sit here and chat.
That's lovely. I'm really glad to help. I mean, honestly, like, you always write the book that you want to read, I think, ultimately. So I needed this book like 20 years ago, thank you, but I still don't really get to full the benefit.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And you wrote a wonderful, beautiful book. So I can't wait to see what you have going on next.
Oh, yeah, not a lot in lockdown, I'll tell you that.
Maybe you can help me with a parenting book.
Yeah, right, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm that good at it, but okay.
Sure. On how to do
be
both.
Quiet and go on your iPad.
I did. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.